Hi everybody and welcome to the next episode, the newest episode of the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. This is our first episode of our brand new series. My name's Tom Hartley and I'm an experienced coach and coach developer. My roots are in football, but I've worked across a range of sports, supporting coaches and coaching at various different levels of performance and participation. In today's episode, I'm joined by the fantastic Pete Sturgess, somebody who I've looked up to and learnt from for many, many years. Pete spent 17 years at the FA, leading work in the foundation phase and shaping how we coach young players. He's been recognised for the impact that he's had, rightly so, including a UK Coaching Lifetime Achievement Award, and was inducted to the FA's Coaching Hall of Fame. In our conversation, we go deep into something that Pete describes as possibility thinking. And I think this topic is so important for every coach to reflect on, regardless of the sport that you work in. Treating coaching as a partnership between coach and child, where their voice matters. We explore how to introduce autonomy without chaos, how to design brilliant learning environments through play, and why scaling the game properly, 2v2s, 2v1s, 3v3s, and other small formats can unlock better decision-making, engagement, and development. We also talk about randomness, noticing, and why the best coaches keep evolving and getting better. Let's get into the first episode of the second series of the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. Here's the ever-brilliant Pete Sturgess. All right, Pete, fantastic to have you on the podcast. I know that our listeners were desperate to hear from you, so it's a delight to have you. And Pete, I've known you and been connected with you in your work for decades now, I suppose. And your approach and the way you go about coaching has had such an impact on me. So it's a privilege to have you in the conversation and to spend some time with you today.
Thank you. I mean, when you said decades, I suddenly realised how old I am. But
so, Pete, I'm going to start with a question to start off our conversation today that might feel like a little curveball, but I'm sure this is quite central to your practice and the work you've done for many years. And I'm interested in the beliefs you hold about coaching that in particular underpin your approach to when you're working with children.
When I was doing my master's, I started reading about possibility thinking from a lady called Anna Kraft, who's sadly passed away now. And as soon as I started reading what this concept was, I just thought, this is either what I've been trying to do, probably very badly, but now there's some like academic rigor towards it, certainly from a child development point of view. And possibility thinking is just accepting that when we are coaching children, particularly, if you see it as a partnership, then the children have got as much to contribute to what the solutions are, where the session goes, what the outcomes can be. They've got as much to contribute as I have. But I'm an adult. I've gone through socialization. I've been put in a box. You know, the barriers, the limits are all there, front and center. Children don't have the same barriers. They don't have the same limits to their thinking. So they haven't been put in a box yet. And I want to know what is possible from their point of view. And it's also a brilliant way to work because it is such a lovely relationship where I value them and hopefully they value being given the opportunity to contribute and be a major part of what everything looks like. So that was a really special moment for me. And I still talk about possibility thinking now when, you know, you might be having a drinks break and you say to the kids, you know, when we go back, when you're on the ball here, what is possible? Because for them, anything is. And that obviously shines through from their ideas and their comments back. So I just think that's a lovely place to be.
When you started using this approach or were more informed about the approach that you were taking, children don't necessarily always have the opportunity in a formal coaching session to bring their own ideas or to feel like they're in a partnership with the coach. Did kids need any help working out how do they bring their ideas and voice? Maybe help's not the right word. Maybe it's permission.
I think that there's a lot of more information out there now about the importance of empowering our athletes and giving them more voice and choice. And I think when it first became popular, and obviously the advantages or the benefits of working in this way, I think coaches misinterpreted it, because if you give total autonomy over to the children, they're not in a state of being where they can accept all of that responsibility and make it really productive. So I think there are steps that coaches need to take before you include some real autonomy in what their learning looks like. And I think coaches sometimes miss those steps out. The session became a little bit chaotic and they weren't experienced enough to almost bring it back into control. And then they thought, this doesn't work, I'm never going to that place again. So I think we have to carefully bring the children to the point where they can then begin to accept a lot more responsibility and ownership over certainly what the session looks like, where it goes from here. Again, what are the possibilities? You know, if we played this game again, could we add in some other things? What might be possible if we played it again, knowing and learning from the last half an hour that we've just played it? Would you do anything different? And I think it's those kind of conversations. I think that's high-level coaching. It doesn't have to be me stopping the session and giving all this technical data and tactical information. I just think working with the children in that really magical way, I think that's high-level coaching.
If coaches are doing this frequently, and should we say coaches are practicing it, so they play with how much responsibility are the children ready for and adjusting things. And I hear your point completely, and I've seen this where coaches maybe have tried voice and choice, they've given it a go, and it hasn't quite gone to plan, and then it's difficult to revisit. But if coaches are frequently engaging this and finding the right balance, what have you experienced? What have you seen happen over time? Where have you ended up in a different place than if you continued in, say, a very air quote traditional sense?
Yeah, I think coaching's always been seen as more of a transmission model. Certainly that's the era that I grew up with. But it never felt right. And it never felt right because at the end of the qualification, the assessors said to me, "We know you won't coach like this with your players." Well, I'm thinking, why have I just gone through 2 weeks of torture when you haven't really given me the tools to be an effective coach with the people that I work with? So I think we've moved away from this transmission model. And I think that's a really positive step, because I think it does empower the very people that we want to be empowered. And virtually every sport, competitive sport, is about decision making. And I think they have to be part of that decision making process. And I have to make a real attempt to try to find out what they're basing their decisions on, what they're attending to, what are they seeing that then makes them do this rather than that. And I think that's the only way that you can get a real insight as to whether the player's making any kind of progress, because you're almost getting an insight into what they're doing and what they're basing their decisions upon. And I think that's really important. But you can't do that by just observation.
You've reminded me of something that makes me smile. That a few weeks ago I was involved in a workshop for some coaches across lots of different sports. And we had a guest on called Keith Sharp from British Cycling. And Keith used this analogy that I think will always stay with me. And he said, if you went to a nightclub and you started dancing at people, you're not going to get very far. But if you dance with people, then you're more likely to strike up rapport and things to go well. And he said, coaching's just the same. You don't coach to people, you coach with people. And that might sound a bit cliche, but I feel that's a fundamental truth that sometimes we miss.
Yeah. Well, I've had a really long relationship with the people at CREC, the Centre for Research in Early Childhood. They were really proactive when we were putting the skills program together all of those years ago. And I've maintained a really strong relationship and contact with them. And they talk about a hybrid pedagogy, which is it's this lovely vision of an adult holding the hand of a child and are on this journey together. But at any given point, each one of them will let the other one lead, and they're prepared to follow. So I think in my coaching, at any given point, if I think I can add value, I'll lead. But I'm also prepared to give the floor to the children if they've got some ideas that we can explore, that engage them, that motivate them. I'm actually prepared to allow them to lead. And I think it's a really lovely image to think that at any given point, I can lead and you're happy to follow, and then vice versa. I think for me, that's a special place to be.
Like I was saying before we hit record, I was doing some preparation this morning for our development plan meetings with some of the players we have at the club where I coach. And I've been really keen to ask the players some questions ahead of tonight and come ready to talk about them. And my experiences tell me that sometimes when we have these one-to-one discussions with young people about their development, they become about giving feedback rather than trying to generate feedback together. And for me, it's always felt quite uncomfortable that we step into a classroom setting which feels very adult in many respects. It's the coach giving lots of information, and I think it's human nature perhaps that the children pick up on the things which are the weaknesses or the areas to strengthen rather than really hold on to the strengths that they have. So a different approach to help the child have all the resources they need to lead parts of the conversation, to look at their development together, feels just a lot more ethical, feels a lot more helpful.
Yeah, I remember it's a futsal example actually, and I was working with some young children in the futsal academy that we had here in Wigan, and because space is at a premium, there's always pressure. We had one player who really wanted to dribble, loved having the ball at their feet, but didn't get a great deal of success. And I think 20 years ago, my natural response to this might be, look, you've got to pass it. But if they wanted to dribble and they were motivated by that, my interaction with this young player was, do you know what? If that's what you really want to do, then can we work together to help you be better at this? So rather than denying them the opportunity, we're actually saying, look, if you want to do that, you've got to develop these skills. Or if you want to do that, you need to get better at this. And then the choice is theirs, but if they buy in, then hopefully they're motivated. And then I can work with them to say, look, it's getting better. We are improving. And there's some really significant markers that are telling us that that's the case. And I think I would rather do that rather than the numerous emails I get from coaches who say, Pete, I've got a dribbler. I'm going to put them on one touch, or I'm going to limit their touches. And I'm thinking, no, just free them up and help them become the best dribbler that they can be. But I do understand how frustrating and, that can be. But I think if the environment's right, I think we can have it all. We can help the player develop, the areas that they want to, and we can skillfully try to make that fit with everything else that's going on.
And I suppose being able to create the environment for the dribbler to have time on the ball to practice their dribbling doesn't have to occupy all the practice, every practice. It's finding the right moment to be able to dial that up and dial other things down.
Yeah. I remember working with one player, and ironically, I think they always used to gravitate to my sessions. He was a dribbler, but in a sports hall, you very quickly run out of space, and you're bumping into a wall, you're going up a blind alley. And I remember seeing the look on his face when I said, you do realise you can stop? And he said, what do you mean, Peter? I said, well, stopping and starting when the ball's at your feet is a great way to get rid of the defender. And he doesn't know when you're going to stop. So instead of continuing to run until you hit that wall down there, try to stop and start. And then if you get your head up, you can then might see another direction that you can dribble into, or a space that you can dribble into. And the best bit is the defender has no idea when you're going to do it. So I said, let's use that. That's like our secret weapon. And it transformed. And I know it sounds a bit twee that, you give them one piece of advice and it transforms everything. But it just gave this player another option rather than the one he was continually choosing. And it just opened up another possibility.
And I think that's a brilliant example of being able to see where the player is at, but then knowing when the right time to offer something new is, that then gives them a whole world of possibilities extra that they can then work with.
Yeah. And there were still times when he would disappear up a blind alley, but he used to turn round to me and we used to laugh because I was thinking, but he did have something else to think about. And I think rather than chastise children and say, you're doing it wrong, you're a poor player, and all of the things that might be involved in those kind of dialogues, I just want the players to think, do you know what? Pete's got my back. And if I need help, I can ask him. And if I make a mistake, he's still got my back. And I just think, why wouldn't you want to work with children like that?
Totally. You might not know the answer to this, and it's less of a coaching football question and more of a coaching question. But if in an alternative universe, Pete Sturgess was coaching full-time in a gymnastics environment or a boxing environment where maybe the risk of the sport is slightly different, the traditions of the sport are slightly different in terms of how an athlete is coached. Do you have any ideas on how you might engage in possibility thinking when the demands of the sport are slightly different to what we see in football?
Wow, I think I'd be awful. Because I've got this thing at the moment about building randomness into practice. And if I give you an example, on lots of occasions, coaches have said to me, I had to wait until half time because I needed to make a change because the opposition did this. And I'm thinking, well, shouldn't you be getting the players to a point where they might see what's happening and they can adjust it before half time? So that got me thinking about, in any practice scenario, whether it's a game or it's more of a structured practice, can you add some kind of randomness that the kids don't know about, or one set of kids or one team doesn't know about, but they've got to notice it and then they've got to react accordingly? So because I've gone down that road, I think I'd be awful at coaching gymnastics, which from my very, not much knowledge of, I think it's more prescribed. But I think the possibility thinking would come from, do you think your body and mind would be capable of something else? Or what is the possibility of adding this move to this move, going through this transition to take you to a different place? I think it would be more of those kind of things. Whereas in football, because of its unpredictable nature, I think it's easier to add that randomness in. And you've also got the safety aspects in gymnastics where you wouldn't want anybody to try something that, was going to hurt them or cause them harm. So yeah. I'd probably be a really poor gymnast.
Something you've brought to my mind, and that point there about noticing, like helping the players notice. And then perhaps zooming out a little bit, the coaches creating space to notice things for themselves as well. I saw this in motorsport quite a lot, where coaching is quite instructional, and I can understand why, because there's a huge safety consequence if stuff goes wrong. So with coaches, we started to think about this broader coaching canvas. So coaching could happen in practice. It could happen in those breaks between laps, or that time when you come in, or if you're focusing on a particular corner, the rest of the lap to get back to the corner could be a coaching moment. But it places more emphasis on the before and the after, and those coaching conversations on the way to and the way from, where you might then be able to engage in getting the driver or the athlete to think more broadly about what are the options I have available today, and then help them become intentional about it. So it wasn't interfering in the moment because the risk was too high, but there was still an opportunity to engage in coaching which wasn't instructional. And I think it really closely back to athletes and coaches being really good at noticing things in the environment.
Yeah, I would imagine when you either slow down into a corner and the time that that happens, or when you accelerate out, is absolutely critical to gain an advantage in motorsport. So I think that would be the conversation, and it is about that before and after, and that preparation. So I think that the conversations can be similar. You know, could you delay your braking, or what's the last point that you could delay your braking, and what's the earliest point that you think you can begin to accelerate out without throwing the car, you know, whatever. So I think it's possible to use that word that's, you know, come up a few times in our chat. It's almost having it on the table as a mechanism for working with whatever athlete you're working with. In a gymnastics sense, if you want to do a triple rather than a double of anything, then you need higher elevation, and how you get that might be from your starting position. You've got to get lower so that you've got more spring coming out of it. How can you do that? When does it start? Do we need to do any work away from the floor if it is, you know, a floor exercise that we can take back into there that is going to help us? I think, yeah, it could be quite exciting, really.
Pete, I'm going to move us into the second part of our conversation, which is our game plan. And in every episode, we ask our guest to contribute something to this game plan. So it's this shared playbook of stories and ideas, lessons that coaches could draw on. This idea is an idea that morphed from listening to a Radio 4 comedy show called The Museum of Curiosity, where the panelists would bring in something and leave it in the museum because it was funny, but also it was of interest to people. And I thought, oh, what could that be like in coaching? So Pete, what would you like to add to our coaching game plan?
Yeah, I mean, I am going to sound like a broken record, but I have a huge thing about the way that you scale down the adult game for young children is absolutely critical, both for their enjoyment, their development, and their long-term participation. And I think we pay lip service to scaled down versions of the game of football, because what we want is to get to the adult version as quickly as possible. And I think we're absolutely missing a trick. And I know there's some changes happening this year, and I think they're long overdue, and I think they will make a massive difference. But unless we really grasp this and make it part of our thinking for any future planning, any instances where young children are involved in the game of football, if we don't look to scale it down appropriately, I think we're absolutely missing the point. So our play phase, I wanted it mandated, but it wasn't possible. So the suggested format for play phase, which is children of 4, 5, and 6 years of age, is 2v2. And if you've got odd numbers, that could be 2v1. I think that's absolutely appropriate for young children who still can feel connected to the game, will continually be having a touch of the ball, a shot, a pass, running to get the ball if it goes off the pitch. That involvement is so important for young children. I would have really have liked the move to 3v3 to go to under 7s and under 8s, because I think the decisions multiply exponentially the more players that you add on both sides. And I'm not sure children, without absolutely doing them a disservice, I think the cognitive load is just too much. I would rather they be in a format where they can make pretty much all of the decisions themselves, rather than put them in a larger format where, in order for it to look anything like we want it to, all of the decisions and the information has to start coming from outside of the field, because there are too many decisions and too many variables to cope with. And so we need to help the children more. Appropriate scaling means that we've got the numbers right, that the players can pretty much sort things out for themselves. And I think that's a really deep and rich learning environment. Rant over.
A rant at all. Well, you're preaching to the choir, really. I think what you just said at the end there, though, sums it up brilliantly. Like getting the numbers right so the players can sort it out themselves. What a great rule of thumb that is for coaches. Why do you say that?
Yeah, I had a bit of a reputation for, if you go and watch Pete, you'll see a lot of 1v1s. I'm now changing my thinking in that I think there's a real value in 2v1, because in 2v1, you've got more decisions to make, whereas before in a 1v1, I think the focus is pretty much on the ball and your opponent, and that's it. And there might be a little glance at where's the space, or, how close is the opponent. But if you've got a teammate, then you've got a really important decision to make, or footballing decision to make, as to whether you share it or whether you use your partner as a decoy. And I think there's a value in 2v1 that we haven't grasped yet, particularly for our youngest players. And I think if we can work with our youngest players to say, do you know what, if ever we've got an overload, we are going to absolutely wipe the floor with you, because we know in depth and to a great extent how to take advantage of that overload. I think that's the start of you putting players together to play whatever format you like, because they know how to do things on their own, but they also know how to work with each other. And I think, for me, that's one of the really important building blocks that we have to recognize and appreciate and really value when we're working with our youngest players.
I think that leap, which it has been in the past, into bigger teams, bigger spaces, bigger goals, and you mentioned a cognitive overload earlier, but it is a leap. And by having 2v2s into 3v3s and so on, it's smaller stepping stones for children to grasp, and perhaps moving from this position where your children have got really firm constraints around, this is how we play, this is what the game looks like, we're learning to learn the game, and then that kind of starts to fade as they get older, because we don't need the constraints so much, because they're learning progressively and incrementally across time. I wonder, right, when coaches are thinking about this, and if there's a coach of an under-7s or an under-8s team thinking, right, what does that mean for my training sessions? We're going into a different format of the game, numbers are smaller, space is smaller. What are the outcomes that I should be aspiring towards in the practices that I run?
But if we're talking about our youngest players, I think coaches are obsessed with what size is your area. For me, and I don't know, I'm not being flippant now, because the area size is important. But when players are younger, there is nothing wrong with giving them more space so that they have more time to think. If you are playing a 2v1, they've got more time to dribble and space to dribble with the ball, to find out what their next option or decision might be. There is more space to destroy your opponent with your partner. So I think there has been a move to a lot of small space work, and I think there's a real value in that, but the returns must be recognized that they are this, but they're not that. And I think if we can get coaches to say, do you know what, I want to work in this area for these returns, and then I'm going to move to another sized area for different returns, I think we're really onto something then, because we're getting coaches thinking about, with all of the different constraints that we can put on the game and the players, we are being a lot more sophisticated in how we deal with those constraints. And I know sometimes space is at a premium. So if you've only got half an AstroTurf, it's really difficult to have 4 or 5 large spaces set up with a small number of players in each one. But we used to work on an AstroTurf, and there were 2 or 3 teams on there. And if we spoke to the other teams, we used to say, I'm working small areas this week. You can have the bigger area, or you can have half that pitch. But it's as though we never speak to anybody, and we never have that discussion as, do you know what, I really want to work on some longer passing or some bigger spaces tonight or next week. Can I have half the pitch? And usually you're going to get what you want. So I think we can become a lot more sophisticated in how we use time and space, and then what that means to the development of the players.
Riley smiling to myself, because I'll just recap something that you said, like you get different returns from different spaces. And that might sound really straightforward, but it's completely true. And it's really paramount, I think, for coaches to think about how we play with the space that we have. Another thread in my mind goes back to that partnership piece with players and creating opportunities for them to adjust the spaces that they're playing in based on the challenge point that they want or need for that moment in time. But it makes me chuckle, especially about the timings too. On some of our earlier episodes of the podcast, we had Martin Dighton, who I know you know well, on as a guest, and Richard Cheetham from the University of Winchester, who both talked about getting rid of timings. One of the first things that Richard said is that I just don't have them in my session anymore. We move on when we're ready to move on. We might even go back. Years ago, I remember Martin saying to me, why do we say we're doing dribbling as for this 90 minutes, but then we're ready to move on next week to passing? Why have we finished dribbling? Why are we constrained to that 90 minutes that we have on the AstroTurf? Why don't we just go with what we need, and we don't feel like we have to move on to a new topic or change the focus entirely? We'll go with what the players want and need at that moment in time.
Yeah, it's a interesting one, and I've been toying with moving away from a session topic to have more of an objective. And I can only tell you about the response we had when we said, right, tonight we're going to try to score more goals. And the discussion was, how might we do it? So the dribbler puts their hand up and immediately says, well, I can beat people and, I can use that. But I also transpired that other players were thinking, well, I'm not a dribbler, but I'm a good passer. And I see, that's where I can help us score more goals. And when we had the discussion, there were so many more children who thought, I can actually contribute to this. Rather than if it's a dribbling session, all your dribblers are going to be thinking, this is great. And everybody else is thinking, well, that's not for me. This is not about me. Whereas if you say, how can we score more goals? I can be saying to little Johnny, the way that you move into all of those spaces, do you think that's going to help us score more goals? And you with a powerful shot, if you get a chance outside the box, you've got to try it, because that's how you can help us score more goals. And then suddenly everybody is working towards the same goal, rather than a topic that I may or may not feel as though I can contribute, or it's about me, or more often than not, it's nothing about me. I bet I'm a defender in this, or, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you set it up that counter-attacking is really important, and your defenders are also trying to see how they can score more goals, suddenly you've engaged the children, because everybody thinks, I can contribute.
Strengths-based approach, without a shadow of a doubt, leaning into what the kids have already got and helping them get better at it. Other guests on the podcast as well have spoken about task design and being a problem setter or a challenge setter, and using that as an engagement tool, but also a different way to be able to acquire skill and solve problems.
Yeah.
So
what is the main problem we're trying to solve tonight?
Yeah.
And then you can really get into possibility thinking. Do you think we could solve it like this or like that? Or who's got an idea how we might solve this problem? Because they've got one more player than us. How are we going to solve it? Yeah. So, yeah, I love that kind of stuff.
I've always had a bit of a stone in my shoe when it comes to magic players in practices. Let's play with an overload or an underload. What returns are limited for the person who's always in possession, and it's not real to the game.
Yeah. I think there was some research, and the research told us that the extra player or the magic player was passed to less because both sides didn't think that he was part of or she was part of their team. So we had actually an adverse effect.
Interesting.
But yeah, but I think they're all things that we've tried, and sometimes you can try it and you get real success. Other times it doesn't quite work. But I think that's part of our development, that we have to notice and reflect upon our own planning and delivery and session design, so that continual cycle of reflection and adaptation helps us get better, as well as the the young players.
Yeah. And look, I'll just go back in time for a moment to earlier in the conversation when you were talking about 1v1s and 2v1s. And you said something like, I've changed my thinking on 1 versus 1. And I think just for a moment, it's brilliant just to be able to pause on that, because you're an incredibly experienced and credible coach, Pete, and so many coaches who work in youth football and know exactly who you are. But you're saying you've changed your views, you've updated them, you're reflecting on how things could be even better. And I think that's really, really important for coaches to recognize that what you believed and what you did a year ago, 5 years ago, doesn't necessarily have to remain the same. The ability to try new things and adjust and evolve your approach is critical for us to be able to remain current with the work that we do.
Yeah, if I may, the focus on 1v1 I thought was absolutely necessary. And I was probably moving towards, I spoke about adding a randomness or unpredictability to your session. I think, and now the importance of 2v1. I remember there were lots of 1v1s where there was a waiting teammate for both of the 1v1 players. And whoever was in possession of the ball at any time could bring their partner in because they recognized that they needed some support. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to say, go in now. I wanted either the player on the ball to think, if I don't bring my teammate in now and pass the ball and give them a little bit more time, we are going to lose possession. I want that to come from the player. Or I even want the teammate to think, if I don't go in now and offer help, we're going to lose possession. And I think it's a very subtle shift, but it's one that the players are beginning to recognize. I would love to stay on the ball for longer and do all the twists, turns, shields, and all of that kind of stuff. But if I don't bring a teammate in and share the ball with them, I am going to lose possession for our team. I want that coming from the players. So there was this almost transitional period that I've now recognized the importance of 2v1. And it's joined with that randomness and unpredictability that comes from the players, And then if in that scenario, the teammate comes in and the two are now dominating the one and the one is getting very tired, I would want his teammate to think, if I don't go in now, my teammate's going to be shattered or we're never going to get the ball back. So I want them to go in now and it becomes a 2v2.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that kind of thing where it's a very subtle shift. And it's a bit like coaches, and I used to do it myself. At the beginning of every activity, I would say go. And I'm thinking, why are you waiting? Why am I the one who starts the practice? And so I hand that over to the players now. So I don't say go. We might discuss what the session looks like, and then I walk away. And then there's about a 5 or a 10-second pause before the kids think, well, Pete's not going to start it. So somebody suddenly runs in with the ball and the game starts. And everybody reacts off that. But 10 years of players reacting off what an opponent does, I think that's going to prepare their mind in a slightly better way than saying, well, we can't start until Pete blows the whistle or Pete says go or whatever. So it's just those kind of things that you try. But I remember I was in Ireland, actually, in Dublin, and I had to say to the kids, I'm not starting it. And I would just walk off and nothing would happen. There were loads of coaches watching and I'm thinking, oh my God, they must think I'm the worst coach in the world. And then one of the kids would say, right, we're off. And then everything would work. But very embarrassing.
No, it's great. I love it. And again, you're shining a light on something that's so embedded in the way that lots of people coach, or the way coaching shows up for many. What's the language I've used recently? Start the game when you and your opponents are ready to go.
Yeah.
And it just gives them all the permission and the triggers. And you're right, starting the game based off the movement of an opponent rather than you saying go is representative.
Yeah. And I'm reading at the moment about reactive agility rather than just developing agility, which is quite, the way we've done it has been quite prescribed, and it's over hurdles. It's between, ladders and stuff like that. But reactive agility is exactly what the game of football is about, because you are reacting off your opponent, your teammates, the ball. And so if we can develop a movement capability that is reactive, where we're over time and over many years, players are really attuned to postural cues from their opponent or from their teammates, then that's going to put us in a much better position when we're trying to read what our opponents are doing. And that might lead to greater anticipation and interceptions. But we have to start it with that reactive agility where my decisions and my movements are based on what my opponent is doing or where the spaces are now, and they're continually changing. I think there's some ground to be made up there within our thinking. And a lot of it comes back to what you and I cut our teeth upon, which is tag and chase games. That is reactive agility times 10. Yeah. And that's where all your scanning, your perception, action, all of those academic terms for skill development or skill acquisition, they are embedded within tag and chase games, particularly around perception.
Which for me just demonstrates that you don't need to make things exponentially complicated or complex as a coach. The really important things are in the simplicity sometimes of tag and chase and how that transfers across into the game.
But it's how you work with the players within that. Because if you want to work on their ability to identify key bits of information, then I need to know what the players are attuning to or what has grabbed their attention. And is it just the opponent? Because if it's just the opponent in a tag and chase game, you're not looking for someone else to hide behind or to use as a barrier. You're not looking for a space to escape into because all of your attention is on, the danger.
Yeah,
I think part of your attention needs to be there, but also part needs to be on what's your escape route.
Yeah, just creates the ground for great questions and brilliant coaching moments.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that we can get better at is finding, and it's partly because of this transition model of coaching, in that we tend to tell you what we've seen and how to solve the problem. I need to get much, much better at finding out what the players are looking at and what's informing their decisions. Because if I don't do that, I'm thinking now, I can't really help you. I can't do anything. And yet it's really difficult because to ask those kind of questions and get really valid responses, I think it's hard. But we can start it. I could start it with a tag and chase game because I could say, is there someone close by you could hide behind if the target came towards you now? And so we could almost point them to the most important bits of information and then keep checking in on whether they're developing that capacity themselves. So.
Like the reality of it pouring with rain on a cold Tuesday night and trying to do all these things whilst you're dealing with...
Don't ask me a question. Just keep me moving.
Precisely. It's not always that simple, but it's working with those principles that I think are really important. Pete, we're going to move into the final part of our conversation, which is some game-changing advice. And we know that the coaches who listen to this podcast really value some tangible ideas that they can then take into their practice. Now, we often say with this game-changing advice, it might be something that a coach could pick up and go and directly apply in the work that they do. It might be something that they edit, depending on the context of the environment where they work in. Or it might be something that they just reflect on and hold on to for a while and come back to at another time. So what's your game-changing advice for coaches?
Wow. I have covered some of them that I wanted to talk about. I don't know whether this is going to answer it, but it comes from a conversation that I had this week as well, because there were three of us, really experienced coaches, and we all talked about the value of volunteering and working alongside somebody and not necessarily being involved in the action, but as a starting point for your future development, the importance of volunteering, giving your time, going through all the things that we've all done, putting cones down, all of that stuff, not in a demeaning sense, because your presence there is obviously valued. But I think too often coaches are looking for the quick fix. And I still get emails from coaches who say, how did you get to where you are now or where you were with the FA? And because they think that, they don't realize that overnight success has taken about 35 years. And I think, I know I started off for 5 years volunteering. I was working at the same time, but those years really gave me an opportunity to shape what I was about. It gave me an opportunity to work with the kind of players that I thought I might be able to help and have an impact with. And it taught me to be humble and to be open-minded and always wanting to learn and know that you could get better because of that process. So I don't know whether it's a game-changing advice, but I think if you do get an opportunity to either be mentored or work alongside somebody, and that might be volunteering, I think there's a huge, huge value in that.
Again, you're talking to somebody who's a huge believer in having a second set of eyes and somebody to be alongside you when you're coaching. And if experienced coaches can put themselves in a position where they're not trying to fix stuff for another coach, but they're there to be helpful and support and maybe share some of their own experiences that help that coach deal with some of the struggles that come with coaching, because it's complex and it's hard and that learning is forever ongoing, that can only add value.
Yeah, I think mentoring has come a long way now, and it's become a highly skilled relationship. I know when I've had lots of informal mentors, normally called assessors in the past. And I think we've moved a long, long way away from your assessor or your mentor coming up to you at the end of a session and saying, well, I wouldn't have done it like that. And I'm just thinking, that's not what I need from you. I need you to, and perhaps I wasn't always clear about, will you watch how well I do this, or whether I do this, or is there anything that you see that? I think those kind of discussions, so you clearly know what you are both going after, I think are important. But I think the first thing you have to accept is we can all get better. So let's look at the most appropriate way for it to work so that I can try to become the best that I can be.
I was involved in a conversation with some coaches just last week, and something emerged from the conversation around how as coaches, we're often around a lot of people a lot of the time, but coaching can feel really isolating because you're in your practice and you're doing your best, but all the other coaches and the experienced coaches, they're off doing their own thing with others as well. So you never...
Yeah.
Or the windows of opportunity to sense make, talk through, just vent sometimes, have somebody pay attention to a certain part of your practice. That window of opportunity is really narrow. So if people are able to pick up the baton and help somebody, be alongside somebody within their own practice, that's...
Yeah. And I think if we adopt it and do it skillfully with the right people and in the right way, I think that could be game-changing, because I think in most instances, we can improve ourselves to help and be a support to help others improve as well. And I think as soon as a coach turns around and says, do you know what, I don't think I can get any better, I think we might as well pack in. And I am constantly aware that I don't do this well, or I need to get better at that, or, is that game right for the kids? That constant questioning and reflection it's a nightmare, because I'm awake. Even now, I've been retired nearly 3 years. I'm still awake at night if I've got a practice idea in my head thinking, would this really work? I need a group of kids to try it out on. And I don't want the kids to be the guinea pigs, but I do want to make sure that whatever I present is right for the kids and engaging and fun, and, is a real learning opportunity.
Pete, thank you so much for being such a brilliant guest on the podcast. I know we could probably leave this rolling for another 2 hours and still be full in the throes of conversation. There's a word that I think has come up a few times for me listening to you through the conversation, and that's engaging or engagement, and trying to find ways to keep the players engaged as often as we can, whether that's smaller formats, exciting problems to solve. But it clearly comes out really strongly for you that player engagement is critical for anything productive in coaching.
Yeah, and And I mean, this might be a nice way to wrap the whole thing up, Tom, because we've talked about empowering the players and engaging them and helping them become active agents in their own development. I see so many coaches, and I've probably added to it through our website, but coaches just want a different idea for every session. Whereas if you've got a really great game that engages the kids, they want to play it, I would repeat it. Not to the point where the kids are saying, oh, no, not again. But if you repeat a practice, and this links really well with how important retrieval and recall are to learning and deepening learning. So if you repeat a practice 2 or 3 weeks down the line that the kids really enjoyed, for me, that's when the players can set it up. We can talk about, what were the rules? So we're deepening their knowledge and understanding. Can you remember something that you did that helped you be successful in this game? So all of that those learning opportunities, we are now revisiting and we're recalling, but it's the players who are going through the process. And I think if you do have a practice that they really like and ask for, then do it again, but deepen the learning and have the next challenges and progressions ready to go, but use it as an opportunity for them to recall and retrieve previous information of how they were successful or not, because that's as important, and use that instead of having a new session every week where the kids are always in a position where by the end of the session, they're probably just learning about how it works, how to be successful, what the rules are, and then we never go back again. So there's never any learning going on because I'm learning it for the first time and it just hasn't stuck. If we can get coaches to think along those lines as well, that might help them, because the kids are sorting everything out. You can now observe as to whether the game was played at a slightly higher level and with more success than previously. And what a great thing to be able to say to the players, oh my goodness, we created so many more goal scoring opportunities this time than we did last time. I wonder if we played again in a couple of weeks' time, you'll add even more. And I just think, wow, you're on a roll then, in my simple head.
Look, Pete, thank you again. It's been brilliant to talk to you, and I'm sure that everybody listening has taken lots of things from our conversation today.
Tom, thank you, and good luck with the podcast. I know they're going to make a difference.
Thanks for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow the show and share it with a coach who might find it useful. I'd love to hear your feedback and any ideas you have for future guests. You can get in touch through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and go well in your next coaching session.